Hi everybody, David Parsons here. Welcome to another edition of The Nostalgia Trap. I hope that you are doing well, despite the world continuing to fall apart around us, which is what we love here at The Nostalgia Trap, at least. And, you know, today's episode is, kind of gets to a little bit of the source of some of that morbid fascination and dark humor that is definitely packed into me, and I know that is probably packed into a lot of people that listen to this show. But anyway, you know, I wanted to talk about Stephen King today, so I brought in my resident expert, literal resident expert. My wife, Claudia Moreno Parsons, is not only a professor of English at Oxnard College, she's also a Stephen King fanatic, and as we talk about on the show, has been carrying around basically his entire collection of books for most of her life, and we have it here in our apartment. I think there'll be a picture of it that I'll post along with this podcast, that Stephen King library. And I'm definitely a Stephen King fan. I read him a lot when I was a kid, and he was kind of a formative voice for me in writing and reading. And so I wanted to get to the heart of that, kind of like why Stephen King? What is it about him? Why is he so popular? And you know, we're at a period right now where his work is as present in popular culture as ever. I think it is like number one at the box office right now, or is about to get knocked off by like Blade Runner or something like that. But either way, you know, Stephen King is a towering figure in American culture, and you know, both movies and television and books. And I wanted to kind of figure out why that is, what it was about him and his work that attracted us as young people and continued to kind of fascinate us, even as we went through, you know, PhD programs. Stephen King, and I can just say that, you know, in PhD programs, Stephen King is generally not well received, and we talk a little bit about that kind of Harold Bloom elitist literary thing. But I you know, there are definitely people that study Stephen King, obviously, in the academy. But I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is me and Claudia talking about Stephen King. And if you enjoy these conversations, why not throw $5 a month at me? It would help me a lot, especially right now, having just moved to California, having barely any employment whatsoever. I don't think you could believe what I'm doing for money if you heard what it is. But a $5 donation to Patreon a month would be incredibly helpful to keep the podcast going. So patreon.com/nostalgiatrap, or keep listening to it for free, you fucking cheapskate asshole. I don't care. I would like some money, but if you think that you can give me $5, I understand. I can't give anyone $5 right now, and certainly not someone who's rude on a podcast. So it's up to you. Let your conscience be your guide. I always like putting it on you that way. And that's from Jiminy Cricket, not Stephen King. So, all right, where was I? Nostalgia Trap. This is a new episode featuring me and Claudia Moreno Parsons talking about Stephen King. I hope you enjoy. Okay, Claudia, our resident Stephen King expert, is with us today.
I don't know about expert.
Well, you know, I think that I should set this up a little bit, because as we like to do on Nostalgia Trap, we like to combine, you know, the personal stories along with whatever content we're talking about. And today I want to talk about Stephen King because it's spooky Halloween times. But also Stephen King is all over the place. I'm like, I guess he has been all our lives, but like It is in the theaters right now. And it's like breaking all sorts of box office records. And then Gerald's Game is just premiered on Netflix. So I wanted to talk to my wife, Claudia Moreno Parsons now. We're living out in California. We're sitting on our sunroom after moving from Brooklyn after many years there. And I thought, you know, it'd be a good time to talk about this for a lot of reasons. One of them is that we physically moved these books. And, you know, when I met you,
yes.
Just to indulge me with this quick story. When I first went to Claudia's house, first time I went to your house in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, the first thing I noticed was that there were books everywhere, arranged on bookshelves, like a library. But the thing that impressed me the most of all those grad school books and everything else were that you had like an entire collection of Stephen King books, like hardcover Stephen King books.
Yes. And I have been moving those around since my very first apartment. I stole a handful of original first editions from my dad when I moved out of their house and have been collecting them ever since, and they never don't go with me in all the million apartments and homes I've ever lived in.
Yeah, well, you save all your books pretty much.
Like, most of them,
we've had discussions about this. The logic of it to me is that we bring so many books into the house, and the logic is if you keep every one, we'll just be entombed in a prison of books at some point.
But it's not a prison. That's
right.
The way to live.
It's a Twilight Zone episode.
Well, hopefully my glasses don't break. Well, but to have the huge collection of books is the whole point for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, the effect was powerful for me. It worked in some ways in that, what it did for me is I immediately felt like I knew you. Like, you know what I mean? I felt like, wow, because Stephen King, and we'll get to this, Stephen King's books, were such a, touchstone for a lot of us as growing up, I think. But for me, they were really important for a lot of different reasons. And, they're really personal. They kind of touch the inside of you in a lot of ways. And so seeing that you had read these books too was kind of like an immediate connection. And I felt like, oh, if you have all that in your head, then we probably have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, yeah. Because not everybody reads Stephen King or likes Stephen King or has the Stephen King stuff. And so I think in some ways it's a specific like marker of one's self, I guess. No,
definitely. And what's funny is that, and again, we can get to this, but Stephen King has kind of this reputation where you're like, I went over to your house and I knew that you were in a PhD program. You were about to finish your PhD at the Graduate Center.
Yeah.
And then there's all these Stephen King books. And I'm like, oh, well, shouldn't she be reading, something more highbrow than this, right? But what's amazing is that getting to know you is that Stephen King connects very powerfully with the work you do as an academic.
Yeah, and it's one of the things about Stephen King I think that people underestimate. There's a lot of schlocky stuff, trashy stuff in the King, but there's also a lot. It's also really, really, a lot of it is really smart. And he's, for me, the connection with the work that I was doing that I did not realize until I got into poetics, is that he's a big poet guy. He's not a poet himself, but he knows like all the weird offbeat 50s, 60s, 70s stuff that people don't know, and he literally references them in some of the books. Doesn't
he open, like, is it Gunslinger that opens with a quote from Ed Dorn?
Yes. Gunslinger is a reference. Part of it references Ed Dorn, but he also talks about Charles Olson, for all of you Olson people out there, in The Shining of all books, because in the book version, Jack is a former professor, and the novel opens up. He's still a professor, or they're remembering it, and she's talking about conversations with other poet people and professor people, and he literally talks about Olson's idea of proprioception. Not that Olson made that up, but Olson talked about it, the sense of that where your body is in space. That's what that word means.
Yeah.
But Olson he's literally referencing Olson's discussions of these things, which when I read it at, the first time around 14, I had no fucking idea what he was talking about, but then later on was like, oh, shit.
Well, it makes sense. When I think of Charles Olson, I think of New England. I think of,
yes. They're from similar places. Yes, right. Definitely.
And I don't know. I just think of boats and a certain kind of dreary connection to Americana.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who Charles Olson is, just real quick, it's like the what David is talking about is he's from this place in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and it's a fishing town. It's an old place, and King is from up in the same kind of area. And you're right. It does make sense that their like sensibilities as Americans, I guess, and in the way that they write and the way that they perceive people would have crossover.
Well, it's funny because we're starting with like the intellectual stuff about King, but we started both of us started reading these books when we were very young. Like, do you remember what the first Stephen King book you read and when that was, and how did that come about?
So my dad was a Stephen King fan, still was a Stephen King fan, and I was a crazy, voracious reader. And my dad and mom bought me tons of books, but it was never quite enough. Those of you who are like readers, there's just never enough of it. And I started just taking books off my dad's shelves, multiple. And the first one I grabbed was Pet Sematary.
And you hid it, right? Like you weren't supposed to. It's like stealing something from your dad's porno stash. It's like you're not, or stealing a cigarette from mom's purse. Yeah.
I was probably 13-ish, give or take. I might have even been 12. I'm gonna go with 13. I knew, you know what? I might have even been younger, because I knew that I was not allowed to read it yet, because my dad. Basically, I could take anything I wanted. Most of it I wasn't interested because I was too young. But there were certain things that I just sort of knew were quote unquote wrong or whatever. And Pet Sematary was totally one of them. And I would read it just kind of like inhaling the pages, and I used to throw it under the couch because there was space under the couch, and I just would slide it back when people were coming and when I was done. And the first time I read it, no one knew I read it. Although, you know what? Maybe my dad knew. I don't know. But yeah, I snuck it because I knew, because of the horror and the sex.
Yeah, well, I mean, I said porno, for a reason, because when I was reading this, I still, and I just got starting to get my mom hooked on Stephen King books now. But she didn't. They didn't know what I was reading. I'd be reading this stuff. That was part of the illicit pleasure of it a little bit. Was that I was, reading this stuff more or less right in front of them. I felt like I was getting away with something.
See, unfortunately, because my dad had read them, he knew, which I think is part of why I was not allowed, and I snuck it because I knew that he knew what kind of insanity was happening in the books.
Yeah, well, Pet Sematary is that's a good one to start with. I think isn't that still one of your favorites of his?
It remains. Pet Sematary, I read it several times. It remains the scariest. And I mean, I haven't read it in years now, but it was the one that scared the shit out of me the most. It also brought me to tears on more than one occasion because it's so... King he's so fucked up because he sets up just like, oh, this is normal life, and look at our 3-year-old and how wonderful he is. And it's not sappy, it's just real, and then, they kill him. And there you are. And
doesn't he reanimate at some point?
Yes, he reanimates. Yeah. So he begins with the cat, though.
I mean,
it begins with the reanimation of the cat.
Just a regular toddler is scary enough, but a reanimated corpse toddler is really bad.
It's probably one of his, outside of maybe Cujo, it's one of his most like sort of psychologically vicious, intense. Yeah. But I guess they're all that way, huh?
Did you talk to people about Pet Sematary? Did you talk to
then?
I mean, because you wouldn't.
No.
I assume you wouldn't have told your parents you're reading it, obviously. But it's funny because
I've never really talked to anybody except when people ask me later on, what was the one that you first read, or what was the scariest one? It's the one I always say.
So I didn't read my first Stephen King. I mean, I was the same age because I was so young when I started high school. But this is part of like the whole technology thing. I like to tell stories about this for all you fucking young millennials out there that aren't that think it's so easy to get things and so easy to find hardcore pornography and all the kinds of nasty things you want to seek out as a young person. When I was 13 and I was starting high school, the only reason I got to read Stephen King is because the library, I got to go to the high school library, which had Stephen King's in them. In other words, the like middle school library didn't have them. Right. They weren't, they deemed that you weren't old enough to read those in middle school.
You're not, which is when I read them in junior high school. Right. I was definitely not in high school yet.
But it didn't ruin you,
Well,
right.
No, my
it just
mind
made
was
you
already,
more curious and made you.
Yeah, my mind was already warped in some ways, and I would not blame Stephen King for me being like, I'm not even. Yeah, no, not even remotely.
So my family, we all loved the Rob Reiner version of Misery.
Oh, Misery.
It's Rob Reiner that did Misery, and right. Is that right?
No, Rob Reiner's the one. Didn't Rob Reiner do Stephen King? I'm sorry. Hello.
Yeah,
how about Stand By Me is the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, I thought he did Misery as well. I'm looking it up now.
He may have done Misery. But at any rate, Misery,
anyway,
that adaptation is fantastic.
Yeah, I'd seen that movie, and it makes me think that, many people probably saw Stephen King, like, movies before they ever, like... read the books if they did.
See, that's why I thought about Stand By Me, because that's where I thought you were going, because that is one of the first, I think.
So
Stephen
Misery
King
is directed by Rob Reiner.
It is Rob Reiner.
Right. Okay. So anyway, I saw that movie and I really liked it, and my family had we rented it a lot or something like that.
That's a twisted family movie, there, buddy.
Yeah, I guess so. We enjoyed it. There's a pace to it. Yeah, I don't know why we all just love quoting the lines and stuff. That's a whole other episode.
Like including your mom. My mother did not like.
Yeah,
that one.
we all love that movie.
Yeah,
it's a really well done movie. Yeah,
no, it is.
You know what? And it makes me think of Gerald's Game, because they're both movies that take place on beds basically the whole time.
Yes,
like you're basically stuck with this main character on a bed, or the main character is stuck in bed. But either way, I saw the book version. I thought, well, I've seen the movie, so I might as well pick up the book in the library. And that was, the first days of high school, like literally the first opening days of being at high school.
And it's the first Stephen King you read.
Yeah, where me just like diving into the Stephen King and realizing that it was so much more graphic than the movie was, and so much more nasty, and so it made me want to read it even more. I mean, it gave it a power that made me so curious to see what was going to happen next. And I think I was pretty well shocked by what I was reading, and again, in part because it was more difficult then this is the 90s early 90s to be exposed to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's also, I think what happens with his stuff is that they're always or almost always psychologically darker. The language is darker than any movie, even the best ones. And not that there's that many best ones, but even the best ones don't quite capture the kind of darkness of them. Makes me think of rereading Cujo a few years ago. If you remember, there was some insanely hot summer in New York, and we kind of holed up in air-conditioned rooms, 2 separate rooms, and I said, hey, I'm going to reread Cujo. So this is just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I just came out of it. It took me maybe a day or 2 days, and I just felt awful.
Yeah.
I felt like shit. It was, I had forgotten just how fucking...
dark it is.
Dark, yeah, like truly, not like movie dark, like dark. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's some other level that he hits with language, which is the thing of underestimating, I think, what he can do with words and like his sentences. And
well, I think the darkness is, I mean, this is on this podcast we usually talk about, especially the AM/FM stuff with Justin, we talk about really dark stuff in America, and like Stephen King seems
Catches
to like
it. He does.
Even though like he's like on Twitter these days, you know, he's kind of like this like
anti-Trump,
I don't know, he's like the
liberalist.
resistance liberal kind of guy. He seems actually in real life, he seems like kind of just a straightforward liberal American, but he has this vision. He captures something in his books about America that's so gross and dark, and actually gets to like some of the stuff we talked about with like mass shootings and like that kind of shit. Like there is some evil violence underneath all of this, roiling underneath in the American belly. And Stephen King's books seem to like
capture
and when
that.
they're at their best, they get that stuff.
They don't always, but when they do, they really, really catch it.
You know what the one that is a good example of that for me, I always think about is the opening of Desperation, which is this huge novel that goes along with what Richard Bachman called the Regulators.
Regulators, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there was a time where hardcover Stephen King books, and I guess this is probably still true. You know, they came out at Costco for really cheap. They were like $10, like new hardcover Stephen King books. And so, you know, when my parents recognized that I liked these books, they didn't ask many questions, and they would often buy these books for me at Costco. And I remember the Desperation Regulators came in like a 2-pack.
It was a big deal.
And I just read them so quickly. And the opening of Desperation is like this really horrifying sequence of something that we think about because we drive through the desert a lot. Like drive a couple, like a married couple driving through the desert, kind of like that Breakdown movie with Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell, yes.
And they get pulled over by a cop, and you realize very quickly that the cop is just pure malevolent evil.
And not in like the
in the most horrifyingly like
not in like your basic everyday LAPD, Baltimore PD, NYPD kind of way. It's actually it's like cop as symbol of deeper evil, and you know what I mean. It's like
it's to me like one of the best and most horrifying portrayals of like being in the hands of law enforcement. That I mean he takes them to. It's like, he takes them to the police station. He arrests them and takes them to the police station. And when he opens the door, this is like the opening of the book. When he opens the door to let them in, like there's a dead little girl like laying on the stairs upside down with her neck broken. Yeah. And he's like, and he says, "Oh shit, did I leave that there?" And like that's the beginning of the book.
This is like it's like I want to say the like utopic ideal. It's Plato, right? With his ideal forms.
I don't know. Maybe, if you say so.
I think it's Plato who has the ideal form of things, the utopia. I don't know if utopia is the right word, but there's this like Platonic, right, Plato. Platonic ideal that there's like the ultimate of evil or the ultimate object of whatever it is, the perfect manifestation of whatever it is you're talking about. And I think King captures the perfect manifestation of evil. Yeah. Wherever it is, it's like this is the ideal evil. This is what it actually looks like.
But he also connects it to like American history in really
absolutely.
I mean sometimes really kind of clunky ways, but sometimes really like subtle ways.
Yes.
And I remember thinking that about it's funny that I'm the one with a Stephen King tattoo, but actually my Stephen King tattoo is more like a Kubrick tattoo because it's actually room 237. I think in the book it's 217.
It's a different number. Yeah, it's a different number.
Or something like
Slightly different
I think
number.
it's 217 in the book.
I think you might be right.
But either way, the room 237 in the movie and in the book, both play this like really dramatic role, and like the idea of like a person entering a room where that level of like I don't know, like Freudian kind of insanity is going on, where he's seeing a young woman who is turning him on and wants to have sex with him, and that woman turns into a dead body,
dying, and then old and dying at the same time.
All of that is just so like hyper resonant, I feel like, and he that room, for me, like Kubrick wanted to make The Shining for a reason. And in part, it's like it feels the way Kubrick portrays it, it feels like 2001 a little bit, like this room at the end of 2001, like the bedroom scene at the end of 2001. Yeah, that there's this like space, like this one room where it all goes down,
and it's horrific.
Yeah, and it's so well drawn. And that idea of like the one room that it's just, I mean, it's a bathroom, like literally room 337, and the actual horror that you see is really just a bathroom with a bathtub in it.
Right, and she attempts to harm the kid. Right, so it's just like the ideal. And if you're thinking about if you're watching The Shining or reading it too, the Danny character, he's like 4 years old or 5 years old or something like that, and Kubrick captures it visually really well, because you keep getting the close-ups of this little tiny round face, you know, the way that toddlers and 4-year-olds are not toddlers, but they still have that kind of baby round face. You know, they haven't kind of come out of it yet, and the King is good at that, at picturing the like horror of, oh, this is the thing that's most precious, and I'm going to turn that into something horrific. And I think you're right. I think it hits into something like American fears.
Yeah, I mean, it's the father. I mean, that's why The Shining, I think, resonates with me the most in part, because it's just so, you know, it's so clearly about families, about American families. Cemetery? I haven't read Pet Sematary.
Yeah, you see,
now.
you gotta. Because it
gotta pick that one up.
It does exactly what you're saying in terms of like, because it's the father that.
Like, he's exploring patriarchy and paternalism, all that stuff, but he's not. It's not. I mean, it's not done in a way that's like, you know, hyper academic, or it's done, or even like, I mean, it's not. He's like not using those words.
No. But he's hitting it. He's getting it. That's the thing. I think that's why there's something to him that's like.
Yeah, he's smuggling that stuff into the culture. Yes. You know what I mean? And like, I mean, it's a very famous quote from Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom was like mad that Stephen King was getting some like literary award.
Oh my God!
And Bloom said something like, you know, this person is painfully inadequate as a writer, and like I can't even read his stuff. Yeah.
Sorry
well, Stephen King said the same thing.
Bloom
basically.
Shakespeare folks out there, but please.
And you know, King defended himself against that, and was and kind of said, you know, look, the kind of writing I'm doing doesn't fall on the radar of someone like Harold Bloom, but it falls on the radar of like ordinary Americans.
Right, and it still gets to them the things that it's the thing. It's like the intellectualism, like the sort of snobby end of that, of assuming that people will not understand the like shit that you say to them, and if you use the fucking highfalutin, as my recent librarian said, highfalutin language uses, then sure, you turn people off, but it doesn't mean that the concepts are not
graspable.
Yeah, or present, right?
Yeah,
or that
or
people
there,
don't
yeah.
respond to it. You know what I mean? Think about your mom, who, okay, we have just recently introduced David's mom to Stephen King, and she's a wonderful person and she reads a ton, but she's not necessarily, and she wouldn't call herself an intellectual in the same way that, I guess, if you've gone through a PhD program or whatever.
Right.
But it's really bothering her. The Stephen King stuff, she can't stop reading it. She keeps going back, but it's disturbing her in a way that a lot of the other kind of fun, scary stuff she's read is not bothering her in the same way that the King is. The King has hit some nerve for her that like she doesn't quite know what to do with, but she knows is like fucked up in a different way.
I mean, you've got the perspective of both sides of this in a lot of ways, because you read this stuff, and I guess so do I, because we read it when we were young, and then we became, you know, educated, quote unquote, and went through. And I mean, you went through an English program. I did history, so I didn't really, you know, study literature or anything like that. In that same
God
way.
forbid, the historians don't study literature.
But at the same time, I don't know. Did it change has your view of Stephen King's, you know, work, has it changed as you've become more, you know, aware of what the whole breadth of the study of American literature?
No, it's interesting. I think despite whatever kind of ideas, I don't know. I guess because like I reject a lot of the sort of sense of what's proper or intellectual or what have you. I mean, the stuff that he does, there are certain things that make me cringe, but
Yeah.
they made me cringe before I had gone through any of the having
the
the
minstrelsy,
yeah.
right? Like there's we have to bring this up if this is the.
So I think that he means well but he's a sort of liberal guy with good intentions.
Right.
And I think he means well, and it comes across as cringy, but it came across as cringy to me before I had any kind of like political or literary language.
He always has these kinds of shucking and jiving black characters that show up that are kind of like
magical.
often, magical.
They're
Negro.
the best.
I think
they're meant to be the like powerful characters.
The Green Mile is like in the entire story. That's all it is.
Right.
It's literally the magical Negro story.
Right. And that shit's definitely makes me cringe, but it did at a pretty young age.
I think it's weird because it makes us cringe. I mean, maybe for me, I can say it's like liberal white guilt when I see things like that. I'm like, oh, you shouldn't portray black people that way. But I think it works for a lot of people. Like
it does work for a lot of people.
Green Mile was actually really celebrated, and I think people still
they do
like it a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think the Morgan Freeman character in Shawshank Redemption, the movie,
right,
or in the book, which is called something longer. It's something I think it's called Rita Hayworth.
It has Rita Hayworth.
Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the character having that element to it as much. Certainly the cook, the guy that is like the caretaker in The Shining is like that.
He's the one who has The Shining. He's the one who connects to.
And part of it is the time, I guess, that he wrote these things.
Definitely. And okay, so speaking of that, he has said that because people are giving him a lot of flack. Everyone is rereading it and looking at that shit again because now there's this film which has avoided the controversy by not showing the adults at all and leaving out all the sex scenes.
Yes. The child sex
scene. So there's the scenes in the early part of it, which, I don't know, maybe it is in the movie. Sorry, disclaimer, we have not actually seen the new version of it, so we don't know.
And why haven't we seen it?
Because
we're not that interested,
right?
No,
it seems like
weird
it's going to be.
This has been such a huge movie. I mean, a huge book and story for me in my life. I remember watching the miniseries when I was younger, the ABC miniseries with Tim Curry,
which I never even saw.
I really liked that one. I mean, I liked it when I was young. I don't know if I would like it now. I think it's maybe kind of cheesy TV movie a little bit. But yeah, I feel like part of it is for me is that I watched the trailer and it looked exactly like Stranger Things, which is like
I didn't like.
This kind
but
of
only
like,
saw one episode.
Yeah, you didn't like it. You saw one episode. Come on. But yeah, the idea that this story of these kids we've seen over and over again, I feel like I'm gonna have to like sit through it. Like it's not gonna be interesting.
It goes back to what I was thinking before of like the thing that Stephen King's writing actually does versus the filmic visual interpretation of it.
Yeah.
That it rarely like reaches the level of darkness that he does.
Yeah.
And so I'm always super wary of watching interpretations of his stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. There's yet to be a film that for me that really captures what's great about Stephen King. Like The Shining, which is obviously like a favorite film, but he did a different thing. Very famously, Stephen King or Stanley Kubrick did a very, very different thing and went a different direction with it.
That King didn't.
But we were just talking about the other day that like. Many films have attempted to capture like Jack Kerouac.
Right.
But this film, for those who haven't seen it, there's a film called Big Sur, that's made by the Polish brothers that came out a few years ago, which I think, and I know Claudia feels the same way, and a lot of critics did too, although most people didn't like this movie. I felt that it was like the best filmic representation of Kerouac and that whole beat scene that I'd ever really seen before.
And partly because it's going for it slightly indirectly, it's capturing a sensibility more than sort of this is Jack Kerouac and this is Allen Ginsberg, right? It's not doing doing it a little more subtly, and so it captures kind of.
It's doing the opposite of what we noticed with Midnight in Paris, that awful Woody Allen movie. Oh my god! Where it's like Ernest Hemingway shows up with like a bear trap, and I have just gotten back from shooting a bear. And I am Ernest Hemingway, and then Zelda Fitzgerald shows up and she's drunk, of course, and
and we turned it off.
Yeah,
it was so
I was
bad.
like, what? These are like. This is like a parade of cartoon characters.
Right. And
but Big Sur avoids that,
Right, Big Sur avoids that, and they're very. I guess Stand By Me.
Yeah, you're right.
That film captures it, but it's not one of King's.
Most
I mean, it's one of his. It's a horror, but it's not horror in quite the way that like the true horrors are. It's a different sort of horror.
Well, that one I feel like, and that's another thing that's kind of annoying about Stephen King in some ways, is that he's like Michael Moore in that he has this kind of like weird, talk about nostalgia trap.
Yeah.
He's got this kind of, nostalgia for the 50s that like it comes out really clearly in the book he wrote and published a few years ago called 11/22/63,
right, yes.
which is
the romanticization
a really great story. It really kind of drew me in as we're sitting here looking at there's a copy of Don DeLillo's Libra on the table, which is another novel that kind of riffs on the Kennedy assassination.
Totally different beast.
Totally different beast, the Libra. But 11/22/63, is a very poppy kind of version of that story. And one of the things that the main narrative is that a guy in today's times, basically post 9/11 era, discovers some
portal into the past
in the back of some liquor store that he can basically like walk into the back basement, and as you walk into the basement, it turns into 1963.
Right.
And he goes through excruciating detail in the first half of this book of like what it's like for him to go sit at a soda counter and like have a fresh root beer.
It's the root beer
those kinds of like nostalgic things about the 50s and early 60s, which were still kind of the 50s.
And that's what Stand By Me does.
Yeah,
Stand By Me creates that ideal kind of or idealistic vision, but it's an idealistic vision for a very small slice of people.
It is. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He talks about how, you could walk down and get a candy for 10 cents and you could go to the movie theater. And everyone talks about like money a lot.
Yes.
How cheap everything was and how happy they were. And it feels like it always feels like nostalgia trap to me, like a little bit of a lie.
And part of the reason that Stand By Me, so the novella Stand By Me, which is not, I think it's not called...
It's called The Body, I think.
It's called The Body.
Yeah.
You're right, thank you. It's called The Body. Is actually quite a bit darker than the... Is it Ron Howard?
Yeah. No, I don't think Ron Howard directed.
Rob
Reiner.
Well, it is Rob Reiner.
Yeah, so Rob Reiner's done a couple Stephen Kings.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's actually a much darker vision because one of the things it includes in the novella is a... story within a story. It's kind of excruciating that the main character is supposed to have written that they totally leave out of the movie, and I was very thankful that they did because it's a kind of shitty thing, but it's supposed to indicate something about the character. It's this like trashy, I don't know, shitty kind of like supposed to be realistic and dark little story that that the grown-up character it's Richard Dreyfuss and who's the young?
I don't remember.
I do. Those of you'll know. It's Gordy from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Will Wheaton. There you go. Will Wheaton. Okay, so it's that character because he's the narrator and he's supposed to have written this dark thing. And anyway, the tone of the book, again, as always, is just several shades more complex and darker than even the best film versions. And Stand By Me is definitely one of the best.
So, okay, we go back to you read Pet Sematary and you were blown away by it at 12 or 13 years old. And then, I mean, at what point do you read all the rest of them? Because I think, when was the heaviest period of Stephen King for you in your life?
Okay, so once I read Pet Sematary, which is the one I have the clearest memory of because I was shoving the book under the couch where I hid things.
Yeah.
Once I started reading that, I didn't stop. And so basically I started with everything that my dad had on the shelf. He would have had things like Cujo, Christine, Salem's Lot, The Dark Half, I think.
There's some old ones in there.
These
Danse
early
Macabre.
Well, Danse Macabre it's nonfiction. It's about why we love horror.
What about The Cycle of the Werewolf?
I read that actually many years later.
I didn't. My dad didn't have pictures.
Yeah, there's the version I have has illustrations. Yeah. I do not remember what age I was, like living at home, that it was out in the open, basically, that I was reading Stephen King. Probably by 15-ish. I'm going to guess I was sneaking them for a very short time. And at some point, I was like, fuck it. And I just would put it out. And my dad realized I liked them. And then once that happened, I made my way through all the old stuff. And then it was a thing where if there was a new Stephen King book, my dad would tell me, we would talk about it. It would be a gift.
Yeah.
And he still calls me, or I call him, or we're like, oh, hey, did you hear King has a new one coming out? Did you read it yet? Do you want me to send it to you? We still do that.
What is the latest one he put out? I think. Well, actually,
there was the 3. That was the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. That was about. It was really the first one and the third one were fantastic, and it was about a guy. It was kind of like about a hard-boiled detective who's retired who comes back, but it's about the initial one is about a guy who drives a car into a crowd. And it's that. And it's really fucking disturbing. And then there's 3 of those.
Well, he pulls this stuff from the headlines. I mean, the one that he did a few years ago called, Full Dark, No Stars?
Oh, God,
has a story in it that's like about the BTK killer, more or less.
Yes. And it's actually one of the best sort of...
dark, horrific.
Fiction, I guess, interpretations of that you could possibly...
It's about a wife kind of figuring out that her husband is a sadistic serial killer, and one that's, and it's very, very close to the BTK story, which I don't know if we need to do a whole show about serial killers at some point, because that's been a big obsession of mine for a long time, and I think actually. I think my parents were really concerned about me when I was in high school because I was so dark and and I would draw. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think, and I think I've mentioned this before. I think parents today would have looked at me as some sort of like Columbine kid or something
worried that you would be.
Yeah, because I just drew pictures of killing and death, and I was obsessed with all that stuff. I always took out. I always spent my lunchtime in the library looking at books of like true crime, like Helter Skelter, stuff about Jeffrey Dahmer, stuff about the whole kind of like the whole pantheon of American psychopaths.
Right, but here's the thing,
and King kind of intersected with that for sure.
Yes, but I think that the thing about
morbid,
right? But reading the fictional versions of this stuff, first of all. Obviously, I guess, maybe not obviously, but obviously does not make you into a fucking serial killer or whatever.
Right.
You're that or you're not that. But I think that it serves as like an acknowledgement that human beings are fucking freaks and that we have, like, you go to the darkest shit places on a regular basis where you're like, what if this and what if that? And most of the times it's kind of fleeting and you're like, ugh, what is that? And you move on. But that it's there, and King kind of allows you that space. I mean, it's like any kind of horror thing. It's why we like horror, why we like to be terrified. There's never gonna remember her name now. It's like 18th century, 17th century, possibly Anne something, and she says the terror elevates you. It opens your mind and it elevates your nerves, and it kind of like it brings you to this place that you have to experience, and King serves that purpose, and so it's one of those sort of.
But it's also just entertaining. Like, it was just
King
fascinating and fun for me to read, and
and
I mean, I remember reading The Dark Half, and the descriptions of George Stark, who is the character in the movie, who's kind of this like spectral double of the author.
Oh my god, that one is so scary.
And he's this guy that goes around killing people with a straight razor. And the way that he depicted these killings and these stabbings and slicings were just so graphic. And I just looked forward to like when George Stark was going to kill another person.
Okay,
to read how disgusting the description of this murder was going to be.
Here's the thing. So David and I have had this argument many times about what I will and will not read or will and will not watch. And David gets mad at me because when shit gets too real on the screen, I walk away, I turn it off.
I'm always like, you have read every fucking Stephen King. How can you not watch this scene?
I have been known to, those of you who know me long enough, I've been known to walk out of movie theaters when shit gets too fucking real. But I think the thing for me, and I maintain what Stephen King does, or writers like him, is that the fiction, because it's fiction, it allows me to deal with shit in a way, and I think it's really important. That's why like storytelling and narrative and fiction are so important to me, because especially for someone like me who I can't watch it for real, or even if it's even if I know it's fiction, it's a movie set, but it's depicted as realistic, there's something that shifts in
It's a safe space for you.
Shut the fuck up. It's a safe. No. Come on.
It happens. I mean, some people would say that about movies. Like, movies I know they're fake, so they allow me to enjoy or deal with this violence while kind of feeling like it's not so present.
But movies that are attempting to depict it as realistically as possible are not creating a space where you're supposed to lose that, right? You're supposed to lose the sense that it's fake. You're supposed to really fully fall into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that because Stephen King plays in this like horror with like quotes around it or whatever, that it allows you to like really get really, really ugly and dark and fucked up. Like you said, looking forward to the graphic scenes
parts of it,
right, that
and reading them again and again, like going back to read those parts again,
right. So it allows you as a person to understand that this is part of us, but not have to, I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there. There is a lot, but I think that
it functions differently for different people.
Definitely. And I know how King functions for me, because there's the twisted part that's like, if you presented the twisted shit in the real world to me for real, I'm not.
But you must like the violence. You must like that kind of stuff if you're reading Stephen King. You know what I mean? Like if someone comes into our house and they see
right.
this bookshelf and they're like, there's like basically like 90.
Literally every.
I don't know how many there are, but there's like 90 Stephen King books
it's however
in the
many he's written. We literally have every single one.
I'll post a picture of the bookcase with this episode.
Please,
but
we literally have every single one as far as I know.
And like if I were a person, and like I was a person that didn't know you very well and came to your house and looked at you, and I thought,
sure.
I drew certain conclusions about you, and one of them was like, oh, she must be there must be an element of her that's like a sick fuck.
Definitely.
That like likes this shit.
Definitely.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But
you don't tend to read that shit from other people.
No.
Like you don't read like for me, the sickest thing I've ever read, and I know anyone who's read it would probably agree with me, the Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, the book, not the movie. The movie is like not related to the book hardly at all. I mean, it captures, I think, a lot of the essence of what Ellis was doing satirically with the society, and the movie is actually awesome on its own. But they're two different works, and the book is like absolutely the most repulsive torture scenes you've ever read in your life. I mean, it's so graphic and insane. Yeah. And whenever I see anyone on the like subway reading that book, I'm always like, you sick fuck. Like, what kind of person reads that book?
Yeah.
But for you, it seems like Stephen King is the only real work that you read that's like super hyper violent.
It totally is. It's interesting how I like that he was the one that I found, and that was the one that's where it sort of resides for me. And yeah, of course there's the like the twisted sick fuck part of me. But there's something important about it being like, quote unquote, not real. Yeah. But it doesn't make it less real, because obviously I read these scenes and they upset me. And like I said, when I read Pet Sematary, you know, I remember crying about it. I remember being literally moved to tears about the real stuff and it being scared in a way that you might be in real life about the shit that was happening. But it was something about, and this is the like English major book reader story person in me that's like, yeah, but that's where it has to be. And you know, maybe that's a flaw of my own because I can't fucking deal with it in real life, but I'll deal with it.
It's a flaw. It's a serious flaw. You should work on that.
I'll deal with it but I think there's something too, you know, you mentioned Freud before or whatever, but I don't know if it's Freud, but it's like the space that you deal with it, or the space that you experience it, that then I guess allows you to have perspective outside of it, you know? I mean, I was the kind of kid who really, really was lost in books 80% of the time.
Right,
85%. It would have been 100% of the time if I could.
And Stephen King's books are really, really fun to be lost in as a kid and as an adult. I mean, I haven't read. I mean, I've read a ton of Stephen King, but not nearly what you've read. And I think probably one of the more recent ones I read whenever I pick one up, it like goes like you just read it in 5 minutes. It's fucking ridiculous. They're like insane. I read that Under the Dome, which is like more than 1,000 pages. I think it's like 1,100 pages or something. Crazy big ones, and I just like went through it in a couple days because it's so, I don't know, it's so compulsively readable. And that might be like above everything else that he does.
Yes.
Like he just makes stuff that is just so fucking popular because if you read it, it goes so fast. And you just can't stop. He really hooked on to whatever that voice is that makes you want to read him.
And that's the thing for me as a person who is interested in narrative and storytelling. There are very few people who are as good at it as he is.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, or whatever you think about it, he is sort of top at using language, which I am deeply fascinated with, the way that we construct our words and the way that we put our sentences together, and like making you listen. Like it's sort of impossible not to listen.
He's like
Whenever
a
you come out of
perfect
the other
delivery
end,
system. I almost wish he was interested in other things so that he could, you know what I mean? So he could write. Because he writes other stuff a little bit, right?
He does essays.
He had like
he
has
about
like
writing
columns in like magazines and stuff like
he
that.
writes about film sometimes. You know, it's at the. I agree when you were talking way at the beginning about Olsen and the poetic stuff. Is like I really wish he would fucking write about that stuff.
Yeah.
That he would talk more about what he thinks about all that, because I would be fascinated to hear what his stories about that stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's kind of a frustrating figure.
Totally. Oh my God. Totally.
I mean, it's funny because like now I feel like I know him a lot more because I've seen like a bunch of YouTube interviews with him. You know, he's kind of a more present figure in pop culture. But like when we were growing up, the only thing we had was these like horrifying pictures that looked like
covers. Yeah,
the back covers of this guy that looked like I was always horrified by him. Like, what did you think of Stephen King, the person, when you were young?
That I didn't want to meet him.
Yeah,
because he seemed like he was scary. He had this huge beard.
Yep.
And these big hair.
Oh no, for me it wasn't the beard because I caught up with him later. He had no beard. Just
no,
he
for
had
me
those
it was
like
the beard.
serial killer glasses,
yes.
And he just looked like a psycho.
You found a picture recently.
Yeah, the one there's a picture of him that was kind of like I think it went viral like on Twitter or Reddit or something like this week. That was like a picture that was used by his like I think either high school or college yearbook.
Yes, it was something like
or
that.
Like a newspaper. He wrote for the campus newspaper. And he has long hair and a beard. He's a total hippie. It's like the late 60s, early 70s.
But he's making this.
making this face like a psycho. And I feel like I know him when I see that. I know what kind of young guy he was. He's a very sarcastic motherfucker.
Yes.
He's the guy that's like the Slayer. You know, the guy that's like screaming Slayer in your face.
Yeah.
Kind of a metalhead, kind of a fucking dropout.
And also
he
a
did
deep drug addict.
That's
for
what I was
gonna
say.
Time.
Yeah. Is that he did a ton of drugs. Like I think he was
shit
like
ton.
Alcoholic, straight up alcoholic.
Yes, pills,
smoked
coke,
weed.
the whole
He
thing.
actually says that in the early years, I think he wrote a couple books without
But
remembering
he doesn't
them
remember
at all.
Yeah.
Coke, pills, all of it.
Right.
But he quit all of that in like what, the early 80s or something like that?
I think it might have been later than that, but yes, at some point he stopped that, and then after that accident where he got run over, he was walking on the side of the road and he almost died.
Yeah, he got his legs all fucked up.
That was another shift in his
he almost quit writing after that.
Yes.
And you read that On Writing book of his?
I did.
That one got like very, very like warm reception. Like that
makes sense. That makes sense.
I remember reading a quote from Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert, of all people, used to be. I mean, it's funny to think of, but like Ebert was an elitist who put himself above Stephen King and said like, "Oh, that's like bullshit. Like you shouldn't even read that. That's for the plebeians."
Oh, please.
But apparently, like reading On Writing
Something
is what
about
changed
that,
his
yeah.
mind. So like, this guy's like something else.
Right.
Speaking of like awful movie adaptations of Stephen King's writing, we just witnessed just a couple months ago of something that they've been trying to adapt for many years is the Dark
there
Tower.
We go. Yep, Dark
so
Tower.
they did this Dark Tower with I think probably the worst casting you could possibly imagine for the Roland. No, not Roland is actually Idris Elba. That's good casting. But Matthew McConaughey is the Dark Man.
But here's the thing,
which is awful.
No, but it could have been fantastic.
Yeah.
It should.
Well, McConaughey,
it should have been fantastic.
I watched a few scenes from it. I also read a lot of reviews of it, and everyone mentioned McConaughey is kind of like awful overacting. And
but yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, he can be good.
Sure, that's what I'm saying. Wasn't he in True Detective?
He's great in True Detective,
and he's great in True. And he plays something. There's like a darkness there, so that it sort of makes sense. But
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but something happened. They went for the.
I think it's more than just the casting. I think the film just didn't work.
It's the action CGI thing that totally loses the And I don't think of Gunslinger as necessarily that series as like the darkest of the stuff he does, but there's.
You like the Dark Tower stuff,
of course.
Though,
I've read the whole series more than once, but every few years I reread the whole thing.
I never could get into that. Part of it is
that's like because you don't do the fantasy thing.
I know. What does Dark Tower mean to you? Like, why did you like Dark Tower?
Well, because it creates compelling worlds.
Yeah.
It's just close enough to our world. Our world is part of it. I'm okay with the fantasy and the world building. I'm a sci-fi person, so that works for me. The Roland character is really interesting, and complicated.
Yeah.
And there are complicated, although sort of, there's a little bit cringy in some of the characters, particularly the black characters.
Yeah.
That gets a little bit...
well, they made Roland black for the movie.
Well, which was a good choice, I think. Well, just because it was Idris Elba, because, you know, he's generally... Fantastic. No, but the... Okay, so you're looking at a 2-hour, what, maybe 3 hours, 2.5 hours?
Sell me on the Dark Tower. Why should I read
You mean the series?
Yeah, because my parents at some point, you know, God bless them, they didn't realize that it was part of a series, and they just like bought me for Christmas newest, one year,
right.
like the newest Dark
like
Tower.
The middle,
it was like
part
7. I'm like, I can't just start reading this.
No, you can't. You can't.
And then I just kind of got burnt on it.
I guess it's a sort of classic story. It's the heroic. It's the no, it's not Odysseus, but it's the classic hero almost on his own to save the various worlds, and the plot thing of it is not in and of itself unusual.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the worlds are being threatened by the evil, and they're all connected by this one particular space, and it's all different universes, and some of it is literally Earth in the 20th century, and some of it is other places, and there's the tower is the kind of center of it, and the gunslinger. I mean, he's obviously playing with old ideas about who the gunslinger is and the heroic and the savior thing, but it's something about the drawing of the characters, I guess, that and the fun story of it, the compelling story of it, the kind of like, it's the journey. It literally is a journey. Yeah. He starts in the one place, and all the trials and tribulations to does he save it or does he not? And I won't reveal it if you haven't.
Well, I mean, you don't have to reveal
it.
the ending, but one thing that
I will say that a lot of people were very fucking upset about the ending. I was not, but people were.
Yeah, that's what I want to mention is that, you know, whenever I talk about Stephen King to people, generally the like one of the cliche things to say about Stephen King is like, oh, you know, he's really good at setting up a story, but he's not good at endings. Like his endings always suck. And
I think it depends.
I found that, I found that that's not always true.
No.
But what is it about his endings that are always why is that? Why does that haunt his work? Is his inability to like close the deal?
One of the things I will say that he fucks it up is when he gets too deep into the fantasy stuff. Right. Whether it be horror or straight up fantasy. Now I'm gonna defend the gunslinger end.
And not enough poetic. Not enough like
right. Okay, so something like
not enough mystery at the end.
Okay,
it's like
right.
the curtain is pulled back and you see that it is just
giant
spider.
And you're like, are you fucking kidding me? Right.
Who fucking cares?
Exactly. But something, let's say like Cujo, which is terrifying and not even supernatural. I think that's where he does it better. When it's not supernatural or fantasy, he allows himself to stay dark as fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
But something about when he plays in fantasy, sci-fi,
the
not
fantasy
sci-fi,
breaks and everything goes back to
and then he goes nuts and he's like, but what about if we do this? It's like he's really high.
Yeah.
But a crazy giant spider would be fantastic, and everyone's like, I don't know if that would actually be fantastic. I'm gonna defend though Under the Domes, and if you haven't read it, most people did not like it, but I did.
Oh, the ending of Under the Dome? Yeah, I did not like it.
I know you did. Most people did not.
And that's the one that they adapted
because it's dark.
They made a movie series out of that,
or a TV
dark series.
It's dark enough, I think, and it's actually twisted enough that I like it.
Yeah.
But with the giant spider, I don't.
You're right. I think that the stories that I think have the most satisfying endings are the ones that are not supernatural
at all. Yeah, no, I would agree.
And he has quite a few that aren't supernatural.
He has many.
Gerald's Game isn't supernatural, right?
Gerald's Game is she's having
hallucinations,
which you can take as real or not real.
That's what's funny is Gerald's Game reminds me of the 127 Hours with James Franco. Right, where it's like a person that's kind of trapped,
of the trapped, isolated person. Sure,
who begins to have like visions, and that's what holds your interest is realizing that this person is having.
Right, and so you can take the real as real or not real or whatever. It doesn't matter, but I think it's why. Stand By Me is why The Body, Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile. There are elements.
The Shining, and as a movie,
yes,
The Shining, and I think this is the heart of the disagreement between Kubrick and King.
Yeah,
I mean there were a lot of things that King didn't like about the adaptation.
Number one, Jack
But
Nicholson.
one of the things that Kubrick does is he kind of like he puts a he puts a lid on the supernatural.
Yes.
It's there.
Which is interesting because
but it's more really about a brutal alcoholic.
It's because, I mean, you know, The Shining, you know, the hotel is haunted. It's ostensibly a straight up
But in the book, the like topiary, that's what they call it, right? The topiary, the like animal bushes are coming alive.
It's not a labyrinth. It's a
right.
topiary. Yeah,
that's right.
There are a lot of things that are different, but yeah, and I think that was King's major issue with Kubrick's version of it is that Kubrick went for a different psychology than I think that King was trying to get.
Yeah.
There's so much in the book of The Shining that's like deep shit about Native American history, deep stuff about being a professor, deep stuff about like a daily married life to an alcoholic that's only kind of glossed over in the film that I think that really annoyed King.
Yeah,
but I think they're just separate things.
Well, I think King also hated Jack Nicholson's performance.
Oh,
he
absolutely.
Said that it looked like Jack Nicholson was crazy the whole movie,
and
he wanted it more to be like
right.
driven crazy. I mean, and Jack Nicholson is kind of like
over
he does
the
that
top.
a lot. And I mentioned this to you before, like, you know, in the movie The Departed, which, you know, got all this praise. Actually won Scorsese his only Best Picture Oscar.
Sure.
But I think Jack Nicholson is fucking terrible in that movie, and he does a similar thing that he does in The Shining, which is this kind of like, I don't know, when you become more like what people expect of you. Yeah. You know, and De Niro does this too a lot in his movies, where it's like De Niro, I mean, the last like
so does Pacino.
15 years.
Al Pacino does that. This is
they've
like
just been playing of like versions of themselves
of what people expect.
And Jack Nicholson definitely does that in The Shining, even though if you watch that the really great making of documentary that Vivian Kubrick's daughter made
is fantastic.
It's awesome, and it really shows you how deep Jack Nicholson was trying to go. I mean, he was like really. He really put a lot of effort into being as crazy
he was
as
taking
possible.
it really seriously. It's just his style.
But yeah, the character does seem completely nuts before he gets there. He's the one. I mean, in that drive,
he seems scary already.
Yeah, in that drive up, he's like, see, Wendy, it's okay. He saw it on the TV, and it's like this guy already seems threatening.
But here's the thing that I think that King's critique is not fair because he is already fucked up before they get there. That's why they're there. Right. He's an alcoholic who keeps losing his
like King
jobs.
Doesn't get how deep his own work is.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? That Kubrick catches like, no, this fucker is already.
That's why I have the tattoo of The Shining. That's like the Kubrick version because I feel like it's a really like important and like useful moment to look at the making of that movie and the adaptation of the book, because it feels like Kubrick understood the work on it's like that what is that Onion t-shirt that says I understand the Muppets on a deeper level than you do.
Yeah.
But it's like, I mean, it's a shitty thing, but it feels like Kubrick like actually kind of got something and felt like he grabbed the essence of it and made something even better.
Well, but that's literary theory right there for you, or at least some version of it that like once the artist puts it out there, whatever you intended, whatever you thought you were doing doesn't fucking matter. It's what your readers and viewers and listeners do with it that actually creates the meaning, right? That's
right, exactly.
An artist never ever. Stephen King it's classic.
The death of the author.
Yes. Yeah, but it's the classic response on the part of the artist to say, "No, fuck you, you got it wrong," and to not accept that once the work is out of your hands, you don't even necessarily know what entirely you were doing. It's not the nature of it.
What, it makes me think of Alfonso Cuarón making Children of Men
without having read it.
Yeah, he adapted from a novel which he refused to read.
Yes,
he like heard about the idea and was like, "Oh, well, that's a great story. I'm going to make that." And people are like, "Okay, well, here's the book." No, I don't need to read that. I'll just make the movie. And what he did is he made a movie which I think most people agree is way, way, way better
than the actual
book. Like Children of Men, the movie is like yards ahead of the original miles novel. ahead of the original novel, because he saw something, like he captured the essence of it in some way,
right?
And like kind of stripped away all the fat,
right? But you also take a work of art and you reinterpret it, and it matters. And like we were talking about this with it of like. Because one of the Stephen King's we started talking about this before. Stephen King has had to, or felt like he's had to, respond to the child sex scene in the original book.
Yes,
and he says something to the effect of, "Well, you know, if I was writing it now, I probably would not have written it the same way I would have left that out or changed it or it wouldn't have occurred, whatever.
Because it's offensive?
Because it's fucked up in some ways. I mean, I don't know what you may think it's fucked up, you may not, but like he's getting a lot of flack.
It's like a bunch of 11 and 12-year-old kids fucking.
All having sex. So it's like,
but they don't. It's not an orgy. They just have sex with the girl.
They each have sex with the girl, and so the girl character, they're like 12.
I certainly read that quite a few times when I was young.
I'm sure we all did.
Yeah,
yeah.
Because I was literally the age of the characters.
Yes,
when
I was a little older, but not much.
Right,
but not much. And so
now I would feel weird reading it.
That's the thing. And so the idea is that the girl says, "Well, the only way for us to transcend whatever the fuck is happening is that you each have to have sex with me."
Right.
And it's a fucked up scene. And
does it make you think of King as gross? Like when you hear that?
Yeah, but I think the thing is, I already thought of King
if I came to you right now and was like, "Hey, Claudia, I wrote a short story. It's about these kids that are 12 years old and they all fuck."
Yeah, totally.
Like, what?
Well, no. If they, I don't know. I guess it depends.
How good is this story?
How good is the story, and in what context?
How much did it sell?
And in what context is the sex used?
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And so he says, "Now, I probably would not have written it that way." And
although, and I brought this up to you before. And we don't really have a solution for this stuff, but like that, the one that, and I thought it was one of his most compelling books because it was so dark, is the collection of short stories. I think it's his last collection of short stories called Full Dark, No Stars.
Oh, right, the one that has the BTK killer on it. Yeah.
It also has a story in it, which is basically just a graphic rape of like.
Isn't that part of the BTK killer one? No,
this is a different story.
Yes, I know which one you.
Most of these stories are not supernatural. I don't think any of them are.
No, none of them are.
But in Full Dark, No Stars, there's a story in which a woman who is like in her 40s.
Yeah.
Some like professional woman is like basically like kidnapped by this giant man who takes her to a sewage drainage ditch tunnel and
it's a very vivid
rapes
scene.
her, and it's graphically described. I mean, I honestly probably the most graphic rape scene I've ever.
Yeah, and she talks about. I still remember because she talks about having
described
splinters,
in a book,
mm-hmm.
or a movie or anything.
Yeah,
and then to spoil the story. She
takes revenge.
Right. She tortures and kills the guy, and it's incredibly satisfying.
Oh my god!
And after I read it, I was kind of like, "Well, that was fun to read." I feel a little dirty, and I also think about Stephen King. Like, how does he get away with this? Because like right now, I mean, in the culture, I would say for the last, it's been years and years that there's been like active. Feminism that's kind of talked about how like these depictions of rape for the purpose of entertainment are fucking gross and like they don't like it. And I don't generally like it either, but at the same, like, I don't know what I do with that. I really don't know what I do with it.
I agree
because at the same time, the story was really fascinating. At the end of it, like, I don't know, it did produce like a lot of good thoughts for me in the sense of like it challenged my ideas about revenge. It challenged my ideas about rape and murder and all those kinds of things. But it was also just kind of a story that's meant to kind of just entertain you. And take you to a dark place?
Yeah, it takes you to the dark place, but I think that if you talk to King, he would say that like it's what I feel like I was trying to think about before of it creates the space to fucking literally or I don't know, narratively witness shit that so, okay, like I said before, right?
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
We watch films or whatever, and if things like truly realistic rape are depicted, I'm more than likely to walk away from it. I'm not going to be able to handle it.
You have not seen any Lars von Trier movies.
No.
Because most of Lars von Trier's oeuvre is just women getting destroyed again and again by men.
And so but there's something about the King stuff that I can like experience it and deal with it and think about it.
Yeah. Whereas others think it's gross. I mean, it
is gross.
It's weird.
It is fucking gross.
But
it's supposed to be. And King would be like, you're not supposed to just fucking feel good after this.
You're exactly. I mean, I didn't read it and be like, oh, I have a boner while I'm reading this, and I'm so into this rape scene. That's not what he's
really
doing. Like reading it is really hard.
Yes,
and it should be.
And it should be. I definitely skimmed a bunch of it.
Right. Yeah, it's tricky because I feel like you have your guys. And you have your gals, you have your artists that you'll
defend.
Yeah, that you'll defend and you'll excuse.
Yeah.
I'm another person that I have some of their work tattooed on me is David Lynch, and he's in some of his movies he's gone to places that have been pretty harshly criticized.
Yep.
I mean, I think that Roger Ebert was pretty famous for giving Blue Velvet like 0 stars and saying that it was like exploited.
Yeah. Which he revisited later.
Isabella Rossellini, who was like, "What are you fucking talking about? I wanted to make this movie." And like, she was like a big kind of creative force in the movie. But either way, like it's funny because it does seem a little arbitrary. Like I'll defend certain artists
and not
like,
others.
And others I'll be like, no, that's
fuck
absolutely
him, right? Or
that's
fuck
exploitation.
her, or whatever, yeah.
And it's actually a really subjective process. And whenever I hear people say like declaring, nope, this one is bad and this one is good, it's like, how can you really say that though?
Right,
because it's different for everyone.
Right, it's way more complicated. And I think that if we're talking about Stephen King, that's part of why his stories are so compelling because, schlock and cringe aside, what I think he does elementally is present a lot of complicated shit. Yes. And I don't know if everyone will think that, and I think a lot of people would argue
that the story of this rape and revenge is actually a complicated story, and a story that even though on the surface it's just like this happened, and then this happened, and the end. You're like, well, deal with it, and that's like kind of gets to the whole why Stephen King is so important. I think in a lot of ways, is because he doesn't have that kind of like. I don't know, overarching sense of like this is so weighty and meaningful. These are stories.
Yeah.
Like these are stories that you're meant to consume. And I think he gets that in the sense of like he's just like, I'm just putting this out there.
Yep.
And like you do what you want with it.
Because I'm gonna show you the whole fucking thing of it and then you have to deal with it. And that's difficult to do because it's never in the, I mean, he's too much of a, I don't know, good guy or liberal or whatever. He's never going to say, oh, the rape was okay or the murder was okay. Right. He's never on that.
He's just going to show you.
Right. No, it's never that. It's never like, oh, you never get the sense that like, oh, this guy is pro this, but he is going to present you. Yeah. But here's the picture and I'm going to show you the whole range. And now it's the thing of like, oh, you didn't. Now, did you like that, or did you not like that? And don't you feel fucked up now? And it's the thing of art. I mean, like I think people will not necessarily think of Stephen King as art in that way, but
which is fucked up.
Because I think it is. Because I think he fucking like he messes with you in that way and makes you deeply uncomfortable and says, "Well, go ahead."
And maybe what's so sinister about him is the kind of like folksy language. That like his voice.
Absolutely.
He has this thing. What's he called? Dear Reader or something.
He does.
He has all these little like language quirks where he kind of like he sounds. It for me that he and this is definitely like a symptom of how he grew up. But like he draws you in the way that like a late night DJ draws you, a radio DJ draws you in of like listen, listeners. There's something going on here. Do you know what I'm talking about? I know you know what I'm talking about. When you go to the refrigerator late at night, I know what you mean. And he kind of like he connects to you. Yes. Like when you read Stephen King, you feel like
he's talking
directly to you. Yes.
Directly. Yes.
Yeah. And
the language is not it's not over your head, not over anybody's head. But that's that thing about like, I mean, a lot of the modernists were doing it. Like the simple language and the straightforward, but yet there's something complicated.
Yeah, he's bringing you to really, really intense places.
With very, very straightforward language, and that's,
We have so much more to talk about, but we have to wrap it up. Thank you for going through some Stephen King with me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I want to thank my guest, Claudia Moreno Parsons. I really liked her, and I really had a great time talking to her about Stephen King like I always do. I hope you enjoyed that. I will have her again on the show when we do another book club very soon. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Patreon.com/nostalgiatrap if you want to give me some money. Otherwise, take care. See you next time.